Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining the session today. So we're going to get started very shortly, but we're just going to wait a couple more minutes because we can still see attendees joining the session. So we'll probably get started a few minutes after 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. CEST. So if you just wait a couple of minutes, we will shortly begin the session. So once again, we will be starting the session shortly. We're just waiting for a couple more attendees to join us. We can still see the numbers going up as people join. And hopefully you can see my screen there. We'll be kicking off with the session very shortly. Just give it another minute before we get started. All right, folks, so we're going to get the session started. So thank you once again for joining the webinar today. We have a really interesting topic. And actually, the webinar that we're going to be running for you today has actually come out the back of KubeCon, which, as I'm sure many of you know, was in Valencia a few weeks ago. And at the event, there were really a lot of discussions around Portworx and its capabilities. And the one strong theme that came out of those discussions was this idea of really having a blueprint to build a production grade Kubernetes based platform, specifically focusing on storage and data management. And so that's what you're going to hear about today. A quick intro from my side. My name is Joe Gardner. I'm the Director of Cloud Native Architecture across the EMEA region for Pure Storage. And I work in the Portworx business unit, which is where all of the cloud native technologies from Pure are built and delivered to our customers. And just before I jump into the agenda, so you get a view of what we're going to be talking about, just a little bit of housekeeping. So the session today is recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with you once the webinar is complete. And we'll be pausing throughout the session to take any questions that might come up. Now, you should see in your little GoToWebinar panel that there's an option for you to ask questions. So please post any questions that you have as we go through the session. And as I said, there'll be plenty of time for us to pause, review those questions, and give you the answers you need. So the agenda for the session today, I'm going to very briefly introduce really a bit of context, I think, into the conversation. And then you're going to hear from two really excellent speakers who also work in the Portworx business unit of Pure Storage. So first of all, you're going to hear from Miguel Rojas, who will introduce himself, but he's based in Madrid and he has an amazing background in Kubernetes, specifically Red Hat technologies. He's going to be talking about what we call Portworx Enterprise. Then we have, well, I'm going to speak after Miguel talking about database technology. And then we have Anthony Hodson. He's got a really great background in public cloud technologies, and he's going to be talking about backup as a service. So you're going to find a really succinct, focused session today, diving a little bit deeper into those topics that we covered at KubeCon. So let's get started. Let's get into it. So I just want to set the scene by first of all talking about where we are as an industry in relation to Kubernetes adoption. And again, continuing the conversation from KubeCon, there's no doubt that Kubernetes is now very much ready for prime time. It's being used in production by large number of what you would call sort of tier one global organizations. it's also very much becoming the default deployment target for applications that are being developed. And the growth rate that we're seeing in cloud native and Kubernetes based technology is absolutely staggering. And actually, I saw an interesting stat around the job market, and we saw that there are now more jobs being listed in Europe for Kubernetes skills than there are VMware skills, which is very interesting. Now, I've been working in this space for a number of years, and I've been following a lot of surveys and polls that are published. We actually ran one ourselves last year at Portworx, where we asked the respondents to talk about the areas of the tech stack that they feel need to mature to make it easier to deploy cloud native applications. And you can see that the majority of respondents ranked application development frameworks and storage and data management in their top 3. So we'll actually be talking about both of these topics today, starting off more on the storage and data management side, and then moving into the application development side, and then we'll kind of span the two in our last section of the webinar. And you know, my view of why we're seeing these two areas stand out as areas that need to mature is really what we're seeing our customers do with Kubernetes. And this is an anecdotal example from a banking customer of Portworx, but they had a pretty aggressive application modernization agenda, which was really driven by cost reduction and enterprise license takeout and so on. Really the main drivers that we see behind container business cases. And this was what they targeted in terms of migrating applications into this Kubernetes environment that they were building. They anticipated being able to get close to 100% of their workloads migrated, which is obviously a very optimistic target. Unfortunately, the reality was a little bit more like this, where they started off with stateless workloads, which if you have any familiarity with containerization, you'll know are pretty easy to containerize. Then they moved on to what you would call non-critical stateful, which for me is development tooling. And this is where things started to slow down as storage came into the picture. And then finally, where things really came to a halt was when they got onto the critical stateful applications. That's really where things started getting tough. And the reason for that is that when you introduce data management into a cloud native environment, you really have to have the advanced tooling around that data lifecycle to make sure that it's protected, it's resilient, it's backed up, and so on. And you'll hear a lot about that today. So what we're going to be talking about is the Portworx platform and how it directly addresses some of those challenges that I've just touched on and helps organizations get more applications into production on Kubernetes-based platforms. And just a couple of key things to know about Portworx before I hand over to one of my colleagues. It really addresses a Kubernetes environment in 2 ways. So we have our bottom layer, our Portworx data management layer, which is really the foundation for building a platform or container as a service that's suitable for stateful applications. And later on, you'll hear about the software as a service products, which are very much about providing that simple curated experience around actually deploying and operating stateful workloads in production. So with that, to address the Portworx data management capabilities and Portworx Store, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Miguel Rojas. So if you just give me one moment to allow Miguel to share his screen, and then he'll pick up from that starting point. So hopefully, Miguel, you should now be able to share your screen, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that great introduction. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing great. As my colleague Joe said, I'm Miguel Rojas. I'm one of the cloud architects in the business unit covering the EMEA region. It's great to be here today. I'm sure that some of your faces were seen by me, or some of you saw me at the KubeCon if you paid us a visit. If not, we're grateful that you're here today. Okay. So as Joe was saying, I'm trying to cover the enterprise version of our product, and I will start by kind of a brief introduction of what we are, what we do, right? So in a nutshell, basically Portworx is a storage layer in Kubernetes. So we simply are running in stateful applications, and that basically opens up Kubernetes to more workloads, because in the end, a software-defined storage layer is one of the things that Joe mentioned. It was one of the biggest worries of Kubernetes in production, because at the moment, there are some solutions that are being great, like, I don't know, ODF or all other solutions. I mean, I come from Red Hat. Before joining this company, I was working 5 years for Red Hat. So ODF is a great solution, but it ties you to OpenShift or NetApp Trident or NetApp ONTAP. You're usually tied to that specific provider, right? They're great solutions, don't get me wrong, but one of the advantages of our product is that we were born before, when everything was kind of, the container spectrum was kind of growing and Kubernetes were getting very strong in the market. Docker was hitting hard at the beginning, and it was kind of the lead up, and then Kubernetes was born in 2014, and Portworx was also founded at the same time, right? The CNCF and Portworx, the Portworx leaders at the moment were working very closely with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, right? And that gave us an advantage of knowing, okay, what's the biggest struggle in the market for people using Kubernetes? Well, storage is. Okay, so you can see that the opportunity of Portworx keys was spotted early on by enterprises, and they had their own reasons for installing it and helping us shape it into what Portworx offers today, right? So also what we see is, so we ran a survey a couple of years ago, and what we saw is that customers were not using Kubernetes for small projects anymore. Kubernetes is now mainstream, right? Everybody is using it. Every customer I talk to in the EMEA region, they are using Kubernetes fast. They want to modernize, and they have their reasons. They have the reasons. They want to modernize applications, as my colleague Joe said before, or they want to save costs in getting out of long, big, expensive ELAs. So there are many reasons why companies are going on Kubernetes, and the biggest one for me is that it's very efficient. It has its attributes, right? You are able to run applications with less resources in less time, with less effort and less people. Right, and you've seen this slide before, but I want to focus here. So things that are moving fast, what Kubernetes has room to mature. So Portworx, of course, has a horse in this race, of course, right? So we believe our product is part of the solution, but as you would hope, we want to know what companies find hard. So we help with it. So we ask the industry each year. We talk with CNCF stakeholders and customers, huge customers using Kubernetes in production every day. So in these questions, in our Kubernetes adoption survey, the question, what percentage of applications being run in containers are traditional stateless web apps versus like internal or custom enterprise applications? So 61% of these applications are internal custom enterprise application. And then the 39% was customer facing web or mobile applications, but still application using Kubernetes, okay? So what you see right now, and you've seen for many years in the market, is that storage companies are trying to adapt to these new trends. That's the reason CNCF created CSI, right? The Container Storage Interface. So, and all these companies have been trying to get to that level of proficiency offering storage for Kubernetes. But it's really hard, because in the end, you're just connecting one hardware to a software trying with a connector, right? And you are limited to that specific connector and that specific node and that specific storage, right? Why don't you just go container native storage approach? Okay, so we all know in this call that the principle, the key attributes of Kubernetes are pluggable architecture, application centric, so Kubernetes native, obviously massive scale, so you can run applications run fast and without a lot of resources and very little time. But sometimes when you're using different layers in your architecture that in the end sometimes limit you, let's be honest, because if you're using a CSI for one specific storage, you are limited to using that storage only, right? Why don't you just go and get a product that's going to help you adopting any cloud or any type of storage or any type of application, right? And what's more important, any Kubernetes distribution, because, and I see this mostly every day, when you are trying Kubernetes, you want to try different versions of Kubernetes because it's more expensive or it's cheaper because the features that one provides are bigger than the other one, and you want to try different stuff, different things, right? As a non-native speaker, one of the words I learned is heterogeneous, right? So then I was like, what is that word about? So basically, heterogeneous means that you run a big number of tools in every environment and you have to tie them all together, right? So Portworx is here to help because you're not limited anymore. In the end, Portworx is just an operator running in your Kubernetes cluster. You don't need to be running any specific connector. You just run one operator in your environment. And with Portworx Store, you basically can take care of your PVCs with PX Store. Then you can backup. You can do DR. This is one of the key things that in the EMEA region my customers trying to look for, a DR solution. And then migration. This is great because once you do kubectl apply file, and you specify one cluster, you've already created this handshake between Kubernetes clusters. You are able to migrate one entire namespace from one cluster A to cluster B in matter of minutes, right? So, but the use cases, what would be the use cases, Miguel? What are you solving for me? So at the moment with Portworx Store, for example, you share, scale, and monitor anywhere in Kubernetes. So all these big companies or small companies, even, you don't need to, it doesn't matter the size, they are really worried about these pain points that I covered before, which is I don't want to be tied to a specific provider, but also with Portworx Backup, I want to backup and restore from and or anywhere, and I'll tell you more about this. One of the latest features that we released with Portworx Backup is data transformation. So when you have a huge data lake in NFS, with Portworx Backup, you take a backup of that specific namespace, and then you're gonna restore it anywhere you want and transform in a Portworx / Kubernetes volume. So it went from an NFS to Portworx volumes in a matter of minutes, right? You didn't have to change or migrate your whole thing or modernizing your application because of different storage. No. Portworx Backup will do it for you. And then disaster recovery, right? It's pretty self-explanatory. So disaster recovery will take care of your whole namespace, data, and the application from cluster A to cluster B in any region, in any cloud. And then migration, I just explained it, Portworx Secure. We enhance the security features of Kubernetes by adding tokens. Okay, so you provide a token, and that data will be only accessible with that token. Then Autopilot, this is great. Autopilot is basically going to resize your volume for you. What does that mean, Miguel? So everybody understands this example, Black Friday, right? So Black Friday is coming, you go from 30 or I don't know, 3,000 requests by day to 30,000, and your volume needs more storage because you need to store more data. If you have to do that manually, it would actually mean over provisioning your cluster of storage, spending more money. What if you can do auto resize of your volume with Autopilot? You add flags. This volume for me is 100% full at 50% of the total. It's increased by 10 gigabytes, and automatically Autopilot is going to do it for you, right? And then we are now getting into the as a service area, but my colleagues will talk about it in a minute. But just in case you didn't know us, Portworx has been named by Gigam, which is the company that takes care of creating these great, cute graphics, and they evaluate every provider in the market. And then they've put us for 3 years in a row in the leader square, right? We've been leading this space for many years, for 3 years, based on Gigam standards, right? But not only the market and us say we are the coolest, right? Customers really trust us, but not in small projects, but also huge projects like T-Mobile. So one of the key things for T-Mobile is when they launch a new iPhone, Apple launch a new iPhone, they need to be really fast and agile in providing service, right? So thanks to Portworx, they were able to go from I need to use just one cloud to just use your Kubernetes environment anywhere you want. And they really saw how these meant less people working, doing manual stuff, and more devices sold, even though sometimes they don't even have enough storage, right? Enough stock, sorry. But I wanted to finish with two slides, which are disaster recovery. The times that we do for disaster recovery is RPO 5 minutes when it's a FAR DR. So disaster recovery Kubernetes in America and another Kubernetes in UK. These are the numbers that we provide at the moment. Okay. And my last slides, a little bit more technical for the technical audience here. This is how would Portworx look in your environment. Okay, so you have, in this case, this is more like a OpenShift environment with 3 masters and 3 nodes, but in the end, it's just an operator running in your environment with one pod of Portworx running in every worker node, and that will mean that you have created this storage cluster that's ready for you, and it's using every storage that you have in-house, in the cloud, or anywhere. Okay, that's it for me. I think I overused some of the time, but I hope it's okay. Thank you, everybody. Joe, I'll give you the screen back.
Thanks, Miguel. So as you can see from the session that Miguel just took you through there, he kind of ran through, I guess the sort of the building blocks of Portworx and how it will play into a CAS or PAS use case, and of course disaster recovery and other elements are critical for that. So thank you, Miguel, for running through that. So I'm going to pivot slightly and now talk about one of the software as a service components. So Miguel, as I said, very much focused on the kind of infrastructure layer, and he touched on the different components of the platform there. I'm now going to talk about Portworx data services, and then finally we'll hand over to our last speaker. So I just want to pause before I go into this section to see if we have any questions, and please, if there's anything we can answer for you, do post your questions. I see we haven't got anything yet, but we'll pause at the end of my section to review questions once again. Okay, so let's get into this. So Portworx Data Services is all about delivering a database as a service capability to your users. Now, to give you a little bit of the kind of inside baseball on the thinking behind this product, we like to think, and well, we know that we acutely understand some of the pain around building Kubernetes-based as a service platforms. But we're also very familiar with public and hybrid cloud use cases. Kubernetes is the driver for that. Portworx also enables that, as you heard from Miguel. Its support for heterogeneous infrastructure is a critical part of that. But what we often see is that there's a real limitation when it comes to access to some of the cloud data services, especially for heavily regulated industries. For example, I'm yet to come across a financial services or government institute that are willing to put large amounts of data into these managed services. But the problem they have is that they want to consume data services in this way, but they don't want to compromise on the user experience by bringing something on-prem that's difficult or unwieldy to manage. And that's really where Portworx Data Services comes into the picture. With this software as a service product, what we're doing is recreating the public cloud DBaaS experience for the development teams and the system administrators and DBAs in an organization without compromising on where that data resides and the security controls required to actually run these services. So essentially, it's creating a DBaaS experience in your own data center, but you control the infrastructure and where that data actually resides. And to give you a little bit of a kind of workflow around what this looks like, from a user perspective, they would access the Portworx Data Service Control Plane. That's the only part of this solution that we host that doesn't live in your own data center. And via that interface, the user is able to choose the data service that they wish to deploy into their own environment. Now, the key thing is that the users of this solution bring their own Kubernetes clusters and connect them to this PDS control plane. And again, I'm just going to make that point. That's the key thing, that you control the infrastructure and where the data resides. Our control plane recreates that DBAS user experience. And once the target clusters have been decided upon and connected to the control plane, the workload is deployed, and the user can then programmatically interface with that workload with connection details that we provide. And the key thing is that this isn't just about deploying the application, it's also about managing the ongoing life cycle of that workload. So yes, we automatically take care of backups, we automatically take care of non-disruptive upgrades, we can configure application replication and manage that full life cycle out of the box. So there's no compromise required on the curated experience that you'd expect from a public cloud. But once again, I'm going to keep making this point, you control where that data and that workload actually reside. Now, to kind of fit this into the picture of an IT organization, you know, we get asked a lot like, well, isn't this an operator? Isn't this just an operator marketplace? Or why can't I use a public cloud service directly? And you absolutely can, but of course, on the DBAS side, as I've touched on, we see issues around lock-in and data sovereignty. And on the operator side, a lot of the conversations we've had around this solution are actually with DBAs who are struggling to get to grips with Kubernetes. And often we get the feedback that, you know, this is a great solution because now I can go back to being a DBA and I don't have to, you know, manage a team of a large number of DBAs all managing different workloads who now have to also go off and learn Kubernetes and operators and how to deploy them. And of course, as I said, it's not just about the deployment, it's also about the ongoing lifecycle and management. And that isn't simple in Kubernetes. Of course, that's an area we have lots of experience in. And so just to summarize, before I very quickly show you what this looks like, we've built this solution on the foundation of Portworx Enterprise. And what we're offering is a curated set of data services that can be consumed on demand, like a DBAS service from a hyperscaler. And then once that deployment is complete, we're then managing that full application lifecycle on demand as required, so that the users don't have to worry about the day-to-day operations of the workload, and you retain control over where that data and application reside. So I wanted to very, very quickly illustrate the simplicity of this tool by showing you PDS, and this is the production control plane that I'm interacting with here. And if I want to deploy an application, it's as simple as this. I can say, in this case, I want to deploy a Kafka. I've already configured a target cluster, so I'll just call this Joji Kafka webinar, blah, 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 something random so that it's unique. I choose my Kubernetes. And of course, if I'm a developer, I would have limited access to what I can see. You'd want to control that from an administrator perspective. I've enabled a couple of namespaces, and everything else here is application specific. Let's say I want a Kafka cluster, so I'll have 3 nodes, and we hit deploy. It's as simple as that. And in the background, what's going to happen is we're going to provision the cluster, put in place all the networking plumbing required to give you direct access into individual instances of that cluster, as well as internal cluster communication between those instances. We'll configure application replication as required, depending on the workload, and also ensure that storage provisioning and placement of volumes is correct to make sure that that data is resilient. And we'll wait for these to come online, but while that's running, let's take a look at an example cluster that we've got. Oh, I've obviously chosen the wrong one there. There we go. Let's take a look at my Postgres that I've got running. And we're now provided with not only a whole set of metrics that are going to help me identify what's happening within that database cluster, but also I can view my connection details, and that's going to allow me now to plug my application in to this data service. So hopefully that has given you a good overview of PDS. And now what we're going to do, if I switch back to my slides, is we're going to look at the other software as a service product within the Portworx platform that was recently announced, and that is backup as a service. And now Miguel has touched on backup, but this again is moving into the hosted service space, where The actual users don't need to run this themselves. And taking you through Portworx backup as a service will be my colleague Anthony. So let me just switch over to you, Ant, so you can present your screen.
Great, thanks, Joe.
Should see that pop up any second now. And with that, I will mute myself and hand over to you.
Right, so I'm Anthony Hodson. I'm a cloud solution architect, a bit of an AWS specialist. I've spent 5 years in total looking after AWS exclusively before coming here, working with clients who are taking this digital transformation journey. Joe, I'm wondering if you can click some slides for me. Who's got that share screen?
Oh yeah, sure. So you can't share your screen. That's no problem.
Not.
Let me fire up your deck. Just give me 1 second to do that, and then we'll get going.
I'll get to it first.
Let me just find that link, and we'll fire off. Okay, cool. So you should see it popping up any second now. Let me know if you can't see it. Oh, it would help if I was a presenter. Okay, here we go. And we want this window, and let's go. Hopefully you can see that, Ant.
Great, there's my smiling face. Okay, so backup. It's time to get excited now. Okay, it's one of
the.
You got me?
Yeah.
There we go. Right, it's one of those things you really want to work when you need it, isn't it? And when you actively don't need it, it's good to know it's there for you. So you'll test your backups actually work right. It's not just that data's written or that you can get the files back. You check that the apps work fully, right? No, okay, Anthony, maybe we don't get through that each time, but you know, the data's there, we say in defense. Well, things are, next slide, please. Things are a bit different in Kubernetes, in the Kubernetes arena, right? So traditional backup tools take the data from the storage of many containers, and they're spread over many machines at various, albeit similar points in time. Now, with the velocity of the data within the platform, you'll have inconsistencies when you try and restore. And a backup you can't trust isn't really a backup, is it? It's some of your data, which is not enough data. So problem solvers like us IT people, optimists, we might say, well, that's a problem for future Anthony to worry about, right? We'll sort it out, we'll put something together. After all, we've got all the config, we created it with code. We've got all the data as we've taken database dumps, and we can redeploy, we can fail forward. Of course, there's a difference between having parts of the system environment and an environment in the whole. So we've all had the experience of moving house. And if you're lucky enough to have people do the removals for you, you know, you take these components, these are your bits of data, right? You unpack, you organize, you have to connect, you have to reconstruct a functional environment for your stakeholders, might be your family, right? Stakeholders who expect services, beds, food, washing, Wi-Fi and Netflix is always the top of the list at my house, having a child. So you've got all your home's backups, but there's a lot to do. And ideally, it would be really nice if this was done for you and to an excellent standard. And this is the experience we bring to Kubernetes with our Portworx backup service. So you don't need to understand the systems that you're backing up, and you don't need to struggle with the restores and reconnecting those components. And you don't need to design for mitigations for ransomware. So 2 slides forward, please, Joe. So is this a little niche? Well, no, not really. If you go back one, thanks. So containers, as we know, are the new normal, and it seems normal to worry about this space. So 82% of organizations are concerned that their current data protection solution won't meet future business challenges. And 67% of organizations struggle to find the right data protection solution for their cloud native apps. So about the word backup, next slide, please. Backup is a use of technology. Now, personally, I would prefer hermetic, immutable Kubernetes cloning tool. And I think we can all understand why I don't work in marketing. So who likes a good user story, right? We're all companies are software companies now, so we're familiar with this sort of stanza. So as a Kubernetes administrator, I want a full copy of my working production system so that I can restore my production system. And this is what we think of as backup. But what does having an application and system cohesive copy of everything, or less than everything, if you prefer, mean? Well, the backup enables migration between different environments, production-like test environments fast, seeding of blue-green environments quickly, DR environments which can be brought up with a restore, ephemeral DR which can be brought up when a disaster event happens with no cost if you're not in a disaster, and immutable copies of your whole environment stored safely just in case, because ransomware does happen. And when we speak to people about this, it's usually a yes and thing. People get excited when the penny drops and they see everything this enables. And this is why I don't like to just think of it as backup. So next slide, please. Portworx Backup is a product, but it's not new, okay? This is good news because it's tested, it's trusted. And what is new is that you no longer need to run the systems which does the backing up. We manage it, we patch it, we ensure it's available, and it's software as a service. And it's one less thing for you to do. So something which in SRE you would call toil, which is necessary work, which repeats, which can be removed. So let's remove it here. So here's some of the features, next slide, of Portworx Backup. Now this is only possible because we at Portworx, by Pure Storage, understand Kubernetes. And Miguel spoke about it, right? We've been around for about as long as Kubernetes has, focusing on persistent storage for containers. And we've designed a solution to meet the need of the operators of Kubernetes and the applications which run on it. So let me take you through some of these. Next slide, please. So a cloud control plane. Using our backup as a service offering, you can create a looser coupling between your source infrastructure and your destination infrastructure. For example, it's not a problem to go from OpenShift to Amazon EKS. It's easy. You can let the users manage their own backups, but you as a platform administrator can also set that safety net for them too by scheduling it. And you can control who has access using identity providers. It plugs straight in. So Azure AD, Google, or any OIDC providers you have. And you can store it on a lower cost medium than the native snapshots, because snapshots are expensive in AWS compared to things like S3. So let's talk about ransomware on the next slide. Did you know that on average, ransomware sits in your estate for 24 days? And before an encryption event, they used to wait 26 days. So we are, as a world, getting more impatient. And usually they delete your backups just before that encryption event and the ransom note is delivered. But with Portworx Backup, they can't. And we do this by ensuring that the storage that it's written to can't be overwritten. So your backups are not really available to ransomware attacks, and you've averted a problem. So next, let's talk about adding clusters. So it's easy anyway in Portworx Backup itself, but within AWS with backup as a service, it's a real lunchtime proof of concept. In fact, try it when you need to create a copy of your environment. But I'll show you a click through as to just how easy this is, and we'll see if Joe can keep up. So first, head to central.portworx.com. This is where you can go to try this product and many others. And then select software as a service from the Portworx Backup, and then go for the trial. Okay, you don't need a credit card, so you don't need to worry about the bills coming in at the end of the month. It's free to try. So you click your named instance of Portworx Backup, which you just created. And then you click on Add Cluster. And then you enter your AWS details, and other clouds are also possible. And this is to find what's there and interface with that platform. So it'll search through your EKS deployments within AWS. And here it is added. And you can click your newly added cluster, click Add to Backup, but we're going to be creating a location to store it. So click this little handy link there, enter some settings where you want to store the data. It'll create the bucket if it's not already in existence. That's, of course, for those who know S3, globally unique. Back on the cluster overview page, you can see what you want to back up, and you can select all of it, subsets of it, as you would hope. That's the next one, Joe. And there we go. Yep. So you create the backup button again, and then we're going to create that backup, right? And we'll see it come through into the main interface using that storage location that we specified. So that it was that easy, right? This is about as easy as it comes, and you can get to the storage files in S3. So if you want to restore files individually, you can do that. You can apply the encryption at the S3 layer. You can use hardware devices if you need to, KMS, all that good stuff. So that's that really. Has anyone got any questions? Otherwise, you know, that's the address to get the backup as a service 30-day trial. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Anne. Very helpful. So let's take a little look. We're at the end of the session, but we've got a little bit of time left. So I've just seen that we do have a few questions coming in, and there was a question about disaster recovery, which I guess goes back to Miguel's question. And it says, if I wanted to stretch Portworx, what latency requirements are there? So I guess that's saying what's the maximum latency that we would tolerate for a stretch cluster. Miguel, can you answer that for us? Oh, it looks like Miguel is has dropped, so I will answer that. So Miguel briefly touched on two DR options, FAR DR, as we like to call it, and Metro DR. And we have slightly different latency requirements for the two different architectures. For a Metro DR cluster, where you stretch Portworx between two clusters, we will tolerate, well, around 10-12 milliseconds round trip time. And for the asynchronous DR, it's essentially, well, it's much, much higher. I mean, we don't see much over sort of 100 milliseconds maximum, but with it being asynchronous, you have far greater flexibility. It's far more forgiving. So hopefully that answered your question. If you've got a follow-up question on that, please post it in the question chat. We had another question. Let me just find that in the list. It says, if I understand correctly, backup as a service can't be connected to on-premise. Is that right? So Anthony, do you know the answer to that one? Anthony, are you still there?
Yes, apologies, double muted. Story of my life. Yeah, thank you. Good question. So you can connect this back to your on-premise. You just, of course, need to put that network in place, and it's a really useful use case as well for moving clusters around between on-premise and cloud or your multiple premises. It is, you know, the control plane is hosted by us, but it can connect through anywhere that has an internet connection.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question. This one's about PDS. It says, will PDS support MongoDB? That's a very good question. So what I think we need to do actually as a team is have sort of a deeper dive into each of these areas based on the feedback and questions we're getting today, where I'd be very happy to cover the roadmap. But yes, we will be supporting additional workloads over the next few months. And we'll be announcing those workloads, some of which are enterprise, some are community-based, and we are working with various organizations to bring more workloads into the platform. So that's something that we could take a deeper dive on. And actually, if you go to the Portworx website, you will see a list of all the PDS workloads that are currently supported. And there's one more question, which says, how does Portworx ransomware protection work in backups? So I'm guessing that is, how does Portworx backup offer some kind of ransomware protection? I think that's the question. So Anthony, I'll let you answer that one if you can.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we would, when we set up a bucket to store your data, we can set that to be write once, read many. And this is a recognized practice that's accepted by the financial institutions as a way of mitigating this sort of problem. And as we put all of your backups into that storage, it can never be overwritten. And you would set the policies for that yourself when you create the storage. So there's a similar technology called a vault in AWS, and this means that essentially when the users come in and when the nefarious people who are trying to remove your backups come in, there's a policy that won't let them change it. Also, as a point of cleanliness, I would suggest you put your backups in a separate AWS account and use some break glass credentials for it that aren't available to your normal everyday users, just as a way of mitigating even further. But that's how you do it.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Ant. Very helpful. And that's actually the last of the questions. So I'll just wait a few seconds if there's anything else coming in. And it doesn't look like it. So, oh, we do have one more question, actually. Let's have a little look. And that looks like something we can follow up on. So thank you for that question, but we'll follow up with you on that. It's a bit of a deep dive topic in itself. So that's it for today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining the session. As I said, recording will be sent out along with some supporting content on each of the topics that we've run through today. And we'll also be following up with some deep dive sessions into each of these capabilities along with the rest of the Portworx platform. The other thing to be aware of is that there are a number of what we call pure accelerate sessions happening across the EMEA region, with the largest being in London. It's on the 29th of June. And so if you want to go deeper into some of the topics we've covered today, then I'd highly recommend registering for at least the live stream of those events, or trying to attend them if you can, because there'll certainly be a lot of Portworx content provided at those sessions. So thank you very much indeed for joining the webinar today, and we hope to see you on another one in the future very soon. Thank you very much.